For a good few years, I've incorporated a dinghy in my fishing. Not necessarily dropping rigs and fishing from it, but exploring the lake, getting large amounts of bait out, and generally just getting a better perception of the lake. When it comes to baiting somewhere up, especially with a large amount of bait, the difference between using a dinghy and a spom is absolutely huge. The amount of time and effort and labour it takes to get a lot of bait out of a spom is pretty laborious and very tedious after a while. Quickly pumping up the dinghy, getting out there with your bucket of bait, is a lot quicker. We're often so used to seeing the lake from the bank that it's a complete perception change when you go out in the boat. Your sense of scale changes, you notice things that you never did before, just the whole place looks different. For me, a half day spent out in the dinghy with nice still weather, I feel like you can learn more in that time than you'll learn an entire season fishing from the bank. When you're drifting around the lake, you can stumble across all sorts of things. You might head to a margin spot that no one ever sees and notice it's completely clear. You might find mussel beds. You might find clear spots out amongst the weed. You might even find really bad snags that you didn't know were there. So all of these little things add up and you can get a much better picture of what's going on out in the lake. Obviously the clarity of water is a big thing on the venue. You know, on the murkier venues, you're not going to learn as much, but there are still lots of bits that you can learn. And obviously on the gin clear pits and whatnot, there's almost nothing that you can't discover. Another factor is the stealth element. You know, I've mentioned about getting bait out for pre-baiting, but on your actual sessions when you're fishing, you can almost sneak up onto areas that you want to fish to. You can do it so quietly. You can ghost out there, drift along. You're almost creeping up on the spot, place your rod, get in, get out, the fish are none the wiser. Another massive advantage is how quickly you can plumb up and build a picture of the depths in a lake. Marker rods and floats are all good and well. You know, most of the time that's the only way we're able to check the depths, and they are brilliant. But you've got to cast them out, you've got to retrieve them, you've got to make the noise, you've got to pop them up, and you've got all of those things to factor in. What I like to do, whether you're just nipping out in the boat to check somewhere or you're going to do it over a whole afternoon, is I head out with my usual rod and reel. I'm gliding around, I go over the spots. I can lay the rod or hold it in my hands and have the lead just touching the water. At this point you can just loosen the clutch and just feed off 1, 2, 3, however many foot until you feel the lead touch bottom. It takes seconds to do, the retrieve time is basically 0. And you can sort of drift a few meters to the left and do it again, a few meters to the left, do it again. And you're building a picture so quickly. And because you're over the top of the spot, sometimes there's a visual element as well. So you're just building such a quick picture quietly and quickly. So as I say, for years I've been using a dinghy, but I haven't always been fishing from it and placing rigs. Last autumn, that all changed when I was fishing a swim that had such bad overhanging trees and I needed to fish long range. The only way to get rods out was to take them by dinghy. You couldn't cast because you get line caught up, you barely had enough room to lift the rod to play them. So this was the first time that I was routinely going out and dropping rigs. I quite quickly got into a rhythm of this, and the ritual's very similar each time. You've got your rod, you've got your rig in the butt ring with the hook point all checked before you're about to depart. You've got your life jacket on obviously, you've got your oars and you're in the boat, and you need a container to carry your bait in. When you're fishing from a small boat like this, you're taking 1 rod out at a time. So that means I take 1 rod's worth of bait out in this little tub. We all know how easy it is to overbait when you've got bait in a boat or you're doing it by hand. It can go in so easily. And in the colder months, that can be the difference between a blank and a capture. So I'd only take what I need, just enough to get a bite. Once you're out in the boat, you've got the rod between your knees, and I always head out to the spot facing it. Once I'm approaching the spot, that's when I start to slow things down. I'll get the lead out of my life jacket pocket or wherever's easiest to hand. I'll attach it to the rig. And then it's a matter of getting near your spot, underarming it out, just as if you're fishing the margins of a lake somewhere, feeding the lead down. Obviously, because you're above the rig so much here, it's going to swing back quite a lot. So you've got to factor that in. I'll usually wait to see it go down. If the water's nice and still, you might get some bubbles come up from the silt where the lead touched bottom. At that point, the rod goes back between your knees, quickly open my tube of bait, and then I'll put in whatever I've brought out over that spot. Nice and tight or spread out, it's up to you. But once you've done that, this is where you've got to be really careful. You've got to get out the spot, and I always go backwards. So I'm always pointing the end of the rod at the spot, the bail arm open and hopefully the spool upright. If the spool's down, it can end up touching the bottom of the boat and trapping the line. If you trap the line and drag the rig, you've probably done your presentation in, and it's going to be hard to get it back over that bait. So this bit's so important. You've got to keep the spool upright, but bail arm open, and you've got to drift out there as quiet as possible all the way back to your rods. Depending on the weather, there's a good chance you might get a bit of a bow in your line coming back, but you can amend this from the bank. If you get back to the bank, get the rod out, hold the rod tip up high, and just really slowly wind down and mend the line to get it as straight as possible. Quite quickly I was catching fish and really enjoying this sort of fishing. Slipping out at first light with the sun coming up in the boat over the spot, it's just a very intimate and different way compared to fishing on the bank. One thing that was noticeable about some of these sessions, I was getting 2, 3, 4 fish over the time I was there. And some of these bites weren't long after I just had a fish, which typically isn't the way it goes on the quieter lakes. After big long range battles, probably a fair bit of commotion over the spot, I was able to go back out there really quietly, you know, the last 40 metres going as quietly as possible, getting that rod back in the zone, just a little handful of bait just to get a bite, back to the bank, rod on the rest, and getting bites an hour later. I've got little doubt that it was catching me bonus fish. 2 real highlight fish from this period. One was a really long range caught common, 32.6 from memory. Yeah. Ooh. Visually, it's just about as perfect as a common could get for me. Dave and Rich were down doing some work as well, so it was really good to share the capture with them. The second highlight came in February, and although this is a fish I have caught before, it's known as the video fish, the one that Terry caught back in the 90s, and it's about as amazing a mirror carp as it gets. So that was a good one as well, and we got a little bit of footage of that. You know where they're holding up in the colder months, it's that little bit easier to drift over to them, place rigs, get out of there. And this one does keep going into some old weed down there. Rather than just sort of winding and pumping, when you do feel them touch weed, if you've got room behind you, it's often better just to sort of slowly walk back. Like I can feel that on the line there. And I'll walk back as far as I can. It just means that you've got a nice, slow, sort of consistent movement on the hook hold. There we go. Yeah, he's nice and in the clear now. Come on, I think he's done. Nice common. Let's go. Yeah. Cool, check this out for a torpedo of a common. Interrupted us midway through the little bit of filming, but we'll never complain about that. That's the beauty of this style of fishing. It's so intimate, less is more. You can get out there really quietly. For all I know, fish were down there, 10 foot down in the depths, a couple of handfuls, another hook bait, another chance. God, I can't believe my luck, I'm into another one. This is a treat to have 2 bites. Well, that was a bit of fun. A couple of fish back to back. Got to get a rig out as soon as possible in the dinghy because there might still be more out there. That's the rig that I'm putting out. Nothing new, nothing fancy. Everyone knows Ronnie. Hook bait wise, I'm using a little pink artificial boilie. There's not actually any crayfish or anything giving me a problem at the moment, but I've been using these most of last year in areas where you've got a lot of crayfish, and they've been brilliant, so it's just a matter of habit. I've got them on. This pale pink one's a new one to the artificial boilie family that we do. People are crying out for some food bait sort of coloured ones, so we've gone through a lot of samples and we've developed some food bait washed out looking baits. You've got a red fish meal, the brown fish meal, a nut mix base sort of colour, and then obviously a washed out pink, which is a fish catcher anywhere it goes. And over the top of that, when I mentioned that little tub, that's what I take out with me. So in there I've got just enough to get me another bite, hopefully. And yeah, no more messing around. Let's get back out in the dinghy. Well, that was a crazy few hours, but very welcome. A lovely old mirror this morning, then a nice common ripped off whilst we were talking, followed by another common just after getting the rod back out. So all in all, if the rules allow and you're able to use a dinghy, go and safely have an explore this spring, see what you can find, and see if you can sneak up on some wily old carp. Oh, talking of wily old carp, this one's the final one of the day following those two commons. Doesn't usually go that well, but yeah, my rig board's looking pretty trashed. My arms are really sore from rowing in and out since this morning. So I'm going to return this one and call today a good day.